There are places that don't feel dangerous until the moment that they are. Places that people return to, places that feel familiar, places where nothing has ever gone wrong before. Nutty Putty Cave was one of those places. It's midnight somewhere, and tonight I have a story for you. Nutty Putty Cave sits just outside Utah County. For years, it had a reputation as a very beginner-friendly cave. It wasn't deep, it wasn't wild, and it wasn't considered as a place that was overly dangerous. Lots of youth groups had gone through it, families had taken day trips to explore parts of it. Experienced cavers often described the Nutty Putty Caves as tight, but quite manageable. That familiarity really mattered because on November 24th, 2009, John Edward Jones wasn't walking into something unknown. He was walking into something that he believed he understood. John was 26 years old, he was a medical student, he was a husband, and he was also a father. And on that day, he joined a small group of family members for what was supposed to be a short cave exploration. Nothing extreme, nothing risky, just an outing a few hours underground, exploring the cave before heading back home. Now inside Nutty Putty, the air changes quickly. There's not a lot of air movement, sounds dull because of the dense nature of the cave and the thick earth between the cave and the surface. Light becomes intentional, every movement has to be deliberate. The Nutty Putty Cave doesn't open up, it actually narrows down. Passages twist, walls close in, and the floor in places becomes uneven and then disappears down into slopes and chutes. At a certain point, John separated slightly from his main group. Not because he was lost, but because he thought he recognized a passage. Now, before going into the Nutty Putty Cave, John had heard about a shortcut that he was really keen to explore, unknown to his family members. He believed that he'd found that shortcut, which was a section of the cave known as the birth canal. It was a tight crawl that led deeper into the cave and then looped back around into the main tunnel. And from where he was standing looking at this particular entrance that he'd found, he decided that it looked right based on what he'd heard and read prior to his expedition. John lowered himself into the opening head first, and at first it wasn't alarming. The passage angled downwards, the walls pressed in, but John could still move quite freely. He inched forward using his arms and his shoulders, sliding carefully down into the tunnel. But as he moved deeper, the tunnel started to narrow. Not abruptly, just gradually as he moved through. The rock itself wasn't loose, it wasn't crumbly, it was solid limestone, cold, unmoving, and formed from thousands of years of evolution. Now, despite the gradual narrowing of the tunnel, John pushed forward a little more, because John thought in his mind that he was in the birth canal, which was the tunnel that looped around and rejoined the main. Even though the tunnel was narrowing, John fully expected that the tunnel was going to bring him out where he wanted to go. So he didn't mind that the tunnel was narrowing, he just assumed it'd be a little tight and then open up again. So despite getting tighter and tighter, John pushed through and he wiggled his way through deeper and deeper, and the tunnel became tighter and tighter. Until finally, John got himself to a point where he realized that something was very, very wrong. John couldn't physically go any further. And as John tried to pull back, his body didn't respond the way that he expected it to. His chest was lower than his hips, his feet were higher than his head, and his shoulders were completely wedged. He tried again, a small movement, just enough to free one arm, but nothing else shifted. The cave held him exactly where he was. John was now completely inverted, nearly upside down in a space so tight that he couldn't even turn his head. And because the angle he was on was so steep, the blood began to rush to his head. Breathing felt different, not impossible, but much, much heavier. Now in that position, wedged head first, vertically down, leverage completely disappears. You can't push backwards, you can't brace, you can't twist. Every single movement costs you oxygen. Every movement wedges you harder into that narrowing tube. Every movement increases panic. Now John, he tried to remain completely calm. He called out over and over again, and his voice echoed through the stone, distorted but somehow audible. And as he was thinking that he was going to be stuck there forever, he heard a voice come back to him. Miraculously, somehow, the others who John had been with had actually heard John's cries for help. And despite being completely stuck and very, very uncomfortable, John was relieved because he knew that help was finally on the way. Rescue teams reached John and immediately they understood the problem. They could see his feet, they could hear him, and they could speak to him, but his body position made everything much, much harder. The angle that he'd wedged himself into, combined with the gravity of his body being near vertical and his body weight with every breath pushing him tighter into the tunnel, made things very, very complicated. They tried to free him using ropes, they tried pulleys, then they devised a complex system designed to lift him slowly upward. And for a moment, it seemed to work. John moved just slightly, hope flickered, but the cave resisted, and then something broke. The pulley system failed. John slipped back into the same position, inverted, trapped, and now more exhausted and more stuck than he was before. And by this point, hours had passed. His breathing was shallow from being wedged so tightly from all sides. His heart was working against gravity, trying to push blood to all his limbs. The blood pressure in his head was increasing. The problem now was no longer strength, it was circulation. Rescuers stayed with John, they talked to him, they kept him conscious, they tried to keep him calm, but the human body can't remain upside down and squeezed tight from all sides indefinitely. Eventually, despite everyone being there, despite all the effort, despite the time, John Edward Jones very sadly passed away inside the cave, and he was never ever removed. The cave itself was sealed afterwards permanently, not because of the danger to others, but because no one wanted anyone else to ever stand where John had stood, and realised too late that the ground wouldn't let them go. Nutty Putty Cave still exists beneath the earth, silent and unchanged. A reminder that some environments don't announce when they become fatal. They don't threaten, they don't rush you, they simply wait for one wrong decision and then refuse to move. Until next time, I'll see you at midnight.